Happy Thanksgiving. This will probably come out Thanksgiving morning. I'm recording this the night before. Now that I've got rolls out of the oven, I've got the desserts made for Thanksgiving. Having Thanksgiving at my daughter-in-law's house tomorrow. It's going to be really, really nice. I've been looking forward to seeing people that I haven't seen in a long time. Friends coming from out of town that I haven't seen. So that's going to be great. Plus my grandson has come from Orlando, and I haven't seen him sometime this summer. I think was the last time I saw him. So it's been several months since I've seen my grandson, and I adore him so much, and I just can't wait to see him. So I'll see him tomorrow. As well as my granddaughter. Can't say I have to talk about my granddaughter because what a sweetheart. I love my grandchildren. I wish my daughter were here, but she and her family are still out in Houston, so she probably will watch this, and I want to wish her a happy Thanksgiving too. She's going to have a house full of guests, family and friends. So this is why the rolls are in the oven. I'll tell you the story about the rolls. The other day, my daughter texted me and asked me if I would send her my roll recipe. Well, I couldn't remember which roll recipe it was that I had made when she was growing up that she remembered, because I've tried several different roll recipes over time. So I went through my recipe book, my handwritten recipes, and I found the one that had the most spots on it. So I figured that was the one that she had remembered me making, and that was my mother's recipe. Well, after having made rolls from other recipes, I realized how different that one was than the other ones that I've seen. And it was different in the fact that it had hardly any fat in it. It only had a couple of tablespoons of shortening in it. And what else? There was something else that it had very little of. Oh, it had a lot of salt. It had I think it was like 3 teaspoons of salt, which is a tablespoon of salt. And this is for 6 cups of flour. And I thought, did my mother really make her rolls that salty? That's way too salty. So I found another recipe in the same book that I had copied down from a lady who was an elderly lady at the time, and she always brought her rolls to potluck dinners. And so I think everybody always loved this lady's rolls. Her name was Mrs. Kraft, Mrs. Temple Kraft, and the name of the recipe was Mrs. Temple Kraft's Country Club Rolls. And so these were the rolls that she always brought to country club potlucks. And yes, at the time we were members of the country club. I ran with that set. I don't anymore, but I did at the time, and I'm not apologizing for it because that was part of my life. But Mrs. Kraft always brought her rolls, and they were always gone. I mean, everybody fought over her rolls because she never brought enough. She brought just as many as she probably could make in the time before church, as the recipe called for them rising for 2 hours. Now, most rolls or breads don't rise for 2 hours. And I got to thinking, I betcha that the reason they rise for 2 hours is she would make the rolls, and then she would leave them out while she was at church, and she would then put them in the oven after church and take them to the country club. So I looked at her recipe, and it was very, very similar to my mother's recipe. But it had a half cup of shortening. It had 2 teaspoons of salt. So, okay, they both called for shortening. I think one of them called for just shortening. It didn't say what kind of shortening. The other one called for snowdrift shortening. I've never seen snowdrift shortening in the stores in years and years and years. But then I got online and I started looking for other I got online and I started looking at other roll recipes. I looked on All Recipes, and I looked on Epicurious, and I looked on the Food Network, and I looked on Taste of Home. Taste of Home is always one of my favorite recipes. not favorite recipes. Taste of Home is one of my favorite sites that has really good country recipes. They're always good. Never fail to be a good recipe in Taste of Home. So I looked closer at those recipes, and then I looked at the back of the bag of flour. The bag of flour that I was using had a roll recipe on it, and those recipes called for a mixture of water and milk. Well, neither Mrs. Kraft nor my mother used milk in her rolls, so that's one thing that made them similar, was neither one of them had milk. They just had water. Well, I looked at one of the recipes on the Taste of Home website, and I found a note that someone had written in as a review, talking about how good these rolls were, and they were just as good when she left out the milk and used just water. So I thought, okay, I'll look at that. And what I discovered was it did have about 2 teaspoons of salt, or less than 2 teaspoons of salt. What it was that it had more flour. That's what it was. It had 2 teaspoons of salt, but it also had more flour than either one of my mother's or Mrs. Kraft's recipes had. And then when I looked at the ratio of the ingredients to the amount of flour that one had, and converted, all the things that you do in your mind when you're trying to make a recipe a little bit smaller, I realized that how similar this recipe was to both of these recipes that I was using. But the difference was it used less shortening than Mrs. Kraft had in her recipe, but it used more shortening than my mother had in her recipe. And then the salt was a little bit less than either one of them had. So that's essentially what I used. I used my mother's recipe, and I increased the shortening by a little bit, and I reduced the salt by just a little bit, and then I made that recipe. And it was after I had finished everything except for rising, the last final rise, after I cut the rolls and got ready to put them in the pan, that I realized the reason my mother's recipe called for less fat was because she used like a half a stick of butter in a pan and made what they call pocketbook rolls. Do you know what pocketbook rolls are? Pocketbook rolls are the kind that you use a cookie cutter or a biscuit cutter, and you cut a circle, and then you dip them in butter on both sides, and then you flip them over, and then you keep making all of the rolls by dipping them in butter and flipping them over until you have your pan full. Well, that's why Mom's recipe had less shortening in it, or less fat in it, because of all of the butter that was going into them at that final step. But I went ahead and made it like I had intended to, and let me tell you right now, those were the most delicious rolls that I have ever had. Now, I have rewritten my mother's recipe and put it in my name, so these are my rolls, because I have made this change in Mom's recipe. And so I will at some point make these rolls and put them on my channel, because they're really good. So I did that for my daughter. I made these rolls a couple of days ago because my daughter wanted my recipe, and I needed to test them before I made any changes to it. And so I cooked them in time for her to get her the recipe, so she would have time to make them for Thanksgiving tomorrow. So tonight I finished making them. Now this recipe was a refrigerator roll recipe. And have you ever made refrigerator rolls? Well, essentially all it is just a regular roll recipe that you make all in one day, except instead of rising it the first time, that you rise it one time and you punch it down, and then you roll it out to make rolls, and then you let it rise the second time, and then you put them in the oven and cook them. It's just like making bread. Really, essentially, it's bread dough with an addition of an egg. That's all it is. But really good. And so tonight I got the rest of the rolls, the roll dough out of the refrigerator, and made the second batch of rolls. And I'm taking them to Thanksgiving tomorrow at my daughter-in-law's house. So is there anything else that I wanted to talk about? Yes, there is something else that I wanted to talk about. I don't remember what it is now. Talking about the videos that I'm doing. I am putting together a video in collaboration with Roots and Refuge with Jess. It's not actually officially a collaboration, but she is doing a video on hybrid seeds. What is the difference between hybrid seeds and GMO and GMO seeds or GMO plants? And what is the difference between a hybrid plant and a GMO plant? And since my background was in plant cell biology, and I know a little bit about that, I told her that, well, I had intended to do a video like that too. And so she was encouraging me to go ahead and do it. So I am considering this to be a collaboration with Jess. And I would, when I do get it out, I would hope that you watch both of these when she gets hers out too. Because I know that hers is going to be beautiful. It's going to be so well done, as everything that she ever does is. But I'm having a really hard time with it. Because if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I tend to get off on tangents. That's something that I acknowledge in myself, that I know I tend to get off on tangents. I know I tend to talk too much, and I talk too long. And I apologize for that. I mean, I have self-diagnosed, and I know it's true, self-diagnosed as ADHD. And probably not with the H, because I've never been hyperactive, but I definitely have a problem with my attention span. I can't focus on anything, and I never have been able to. And I did read, I read a book, you read a book. I read a book on adult ADHD and what the symptoms are of adult ADHD. And I could check off, yes, 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 yes. I don't think there was anything on there that I said no to. So it's obvious, even though I've never been to a psychologist and been tested for it. I know my own traits and my own tendencies, and I know that I tend to get easily distracted and have a really hard time focusing on one thing, and that's pretty much characteristic of it. I've lived with this all my life. I've adjusted to it, and I can't imagine what it would be like not to be like this, because this is just the way I am. But I'm also acknowledging the fact that I have a really hard time when I'm making a video staying on the subject. Like right now, I started talking about rolls, and here I am talking about GMO seeds and ADHD. This is typical Ginger Rose, typical Grandma Rose. And I'm not going to apologize for it, because this is just who I am. I'm glad you put up with me. I am really totally glad that you put up with me, and I thank you for all the subscribers that I have. I am over 600 subscribers now, so I'm easing up to that 1,000 point. And darn it, I really appreciate that. I never ever thought that in the span of just a few months, I started my channel after March. It was after I went down to the Deep South gathering at Danny and Wanda's house back in March that I ever put up my first video. Now, I had recorded videos, I just hadn't edited anything, and I hadn't put it up on YouTube, because I had not used a video editing program before, and I was afraid. I just didn't have any self-confidence when it came to that. And Daryl of Two Family Homestead has helped a lot of people with their video editing skills, and it was because of Daryl that I was able to get up the courage to put up my first video. So since toward the end of March and now, the middle of November, I mean, how many months is that? 8 months. In 8 months, I have now over 600 subscribers, and that's pretty good coming from scratch to over 600 subscribers. So thank you very, very much, y'all. I appreciate it so much, and hopefully I will be able to get my act together and get the videos that I have already recorded. But I've been busy working on this other thing, and I haven't taken the time to edit the videos that I've already done. Now, the problems with some of them is that I did them before we had this frost, and the plants out in my garden look different. One of them I was doing was preserving basil and showing some ways to preserve basil and some of my other herbs. Well, at this point, the basil in my garden is black, and I doubt any of you have enough fresh basil to do this with. So, should I go ahead and put up this video, or should I wait for next year? I've done it. I might as well go ahead and put it up, and at least maybe you can store it in your bonnet, and think about it next year when it comes time to be preserving your basil. One of them is very, very similar to pesto. It's similar but different. Let's say that. And the other one is a drying method, and again similar but different. So I'm pleased to do this, and it's been an experiment. This is something that I've never done before. But again, I saw a video on YouTube, and I thought, well, that looks great, and I've got all this basil, and I've got all these other things. I'm going to try this, and I think it's going to work. It made a lot of sense, and I've tried it, and we'll find out in the middle of the winter when I don't have any more fresh basil in my refrigerator if it works or not, because it's going to take a while to be preserved. Like anything does, it has to sit for a while before it's done. But I just wanted to come on and wish you all happy Thanksgiving. Hope you have a wonderful day. Have communing with your family. Communing is probably not the correct word, but you know what I mean. Visiting with your family and your loved ones, and saying thank you for all of the good things that have happened in our life, and saying thank you for being able to survive the not so good things that have gone on in our lives, getting past these things that were hard, and going on with our lives. And we can certainly say thanks for that. But I think Thanksgiving is probably my favorite holiday. And who was it? Somebody else. Here I'm going on another tangent. But this is something that I'm going to say, and it made such sense, and I don't remember who it was. A video that I watched just the other day, and they were talking about going into, maybe it was Danny and Wanda. It was Danny and Wanda King, Deep South Homestead. I'm positive that's who it was. Danny and Wanda, Deep South Homestead, or Danny was talking about going into Walmart and trying to buy a pumpkin. They wanted fresh pumpkin to make pumpkin bread or pumpkin pie or whatever for Thanksgiving. And they couldn't find any pumpkins. And asked the checker, where were the pumpkins? And she said, well, Halloween's already over. And it was like, come on. Thanksgiving, people make pumpkin pies. They make pumpkin bread. They do all of these things with pumpkin. If you don't have pumpkins in the store, how are you going to do this? And she said, oh, people use canned pumpkin. And I got to thinking about, I went to the dollar store yesterday or the day before. I had, goodness, the dog is right here, pushed the tripod, so I apologize for that. But I went into the dollar store the other day and was buying groceries, the canned items and the paper items that I didn't want to buy at the grocery. And I went down the holiday aisle. There, every store, dollar store, drugstore, Walmart, all of the stores have a section of the store that they dedicate to whatever holiday is in season. And again, it was all Christmas. And there was one little small section of this aisle where they had their sale items. And in that sale items were their fall decorations, like the colored leaves that you use to put in you know what I mean, the silk flowers, silk leaves that are colored for fall colors. They had other things that would use in fall decorations that one would use at Thanksgiving and in Thanksgiving decorations. And these were on their half price aisle. It was like they had gone directly from Halloween to Christmas. And this is exactly the same thing that Danny found. And it's really sad because for me, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. I love getting together with my family and saying thanks for the blessings of having this family and friends. And I love the thought behind Thanksgiving. Now, Christmas, of course, I adore Christmas, but Christmas has become so commercial. And maybe that's what it is about Thanksgiving, is Thanksgiving is not commercialized at all. People forget that Thanksgiving's even there when it comes to things, buying things for it in the store. You can't do it. The stores skip right over it and go directly from Halloween to Christmas. And that's really sad, isn't it? But the commercialization of Christmas, Santa Claus and all the gift giving and all of the hype around Christmas, I don't like. And I think that's what it is about Thanksgiving that I do like. Y'all, just happy Thanksgiving. Happy, happy Thanksgiving. And thank you for all the blessings in our life. It's been wonderful for me to make friends, many, many friends that I've never met, and many friends that I have met too. It's fabulous. This community is wonderful, and I love it. And that's one of the things that I want to say thank you for, is thank you for my friends. So bye, y'all. See you next time.